Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's fifth edition of our webinar series from the AUR Venture Grant. Tonight's topic is going to be change management with Dr. Gulani. Just as a reminder of what the purpose of this webinar series is, this is funded by a grant from the AUR R&E Venture Fund, and it is titled Where's Waldo? Helping Mid-Career Faculty Stand Out from the Crowd. The purpose of this is to develop a curriculum that will really benefit that group of mid-career faculty who are in between development opportunities, having passed the early career stage and now moving on to the mid-career stage, where we know that there really is a dearth of available programming for this group of individuals. So this grant will target that group. Part of it is this webinar series, and we are now on our fifth webinar. Hopefully you've all had an opportunity to participate in at least one of the prior ones, which are also housed on the AUR website. We're continuing to curate our reading list of very high yield books that deal with some of the challenges that mid-career faculty face, particularly in the management and self-awareness realm. We are curating YouTube videos on productivity topics because we all know we need help with getting everything done in the day, particularly as our administrative responsibilities add up on top of our clinical work. And then ultimately, through an application process, we are going to have a small group longitudinal course, which will involve a Coursera course that will be done together collectively as a group. And then we were going to do some dedicated small group sessions on things like research and writing mentorship, looking at your CV, looking for gaps, trying to figure out how to fill in those gaps and really help each other with that, and also virtual journal clubs. So having said that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Robbins to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks for that introduction. I'm super excited to have Dr. Gulani here today. He is the chair of radiology at the University of Michigan. I have known Dr. Gulani forever. Like before I started my radiology career, I was a fourth year medical student doing a radiology rotation, and Vikas was a first year radiology resident, and we shared some time in the neuro reading room. And it was then that I learned that Dr. Gulani is one of the most professional human beings that I know. I'm thrilled to see that he is leading the Department of Radiology that trained me, and I'm excited that he's here today to speak about change management and some of the challenges that we might face as we move forward in our careers. So with that, I will pass the microphone.
Thank you, and I'm gonna share my slides. And this is a talk that Jess had asked me to share, and thank you, Jess, for that very kind introduction, far kinder than I probably deserve. But you know, this is on how to manage difficult behavior, and we had talked about this at RSNA, and in particular in context of mid-career faculty. And you know, you may be asked to lead teams where you are facing challenges in managing behavior. So always these slides start with the conflict of interest disclosure. This is, I don't think, relevant to the particular talk, which is that I have IP that has been licensed by Siemens Healthineers, and I get research support from Siemens Healthineers. Now, you know, the question that we ask ourselves is, what do we do regarding unprofessional behavior? It is surprisingly and sadly common out there. And you know, when we face it, we need to have some tools in our pocket ready to deal with it. And I will add that I don't hold any special wisdom on this. I'm just sharing some experiences and observations that I've had over the course of years, and a lot of this is open to discussion as we go along. So this is not going forward. Okay. So, you know, some of the considerations that we want to talk about are regarding how you might want to hire or build a team, how do you maintain a team, and really how do you maintain the sanity of everyone involved? Because I think that the problem with this behavior is that it tends to take away from the experience at work of everyone around them. So, how do you box it up and put it in a corner or root it out altogether is, I think, a critical question for all of us. Now, I want to emphasize at the start of this that difficult teams can be self-created or inherited. And at the end, of course, there's a final common pathway that you have a difficult behavior pattern and you want to try to manage it. But I think it's very easy to point the finger at someone else, at the inherited team. But the self-created problems are also there. We may tolerate behavior, and that behavior then becomes endemic to the team that you're dealing with, and you propagate what you tolerate. And I would argue that if a problem is self-created, it may actually be harder to recognize because we've sort of seen it grow slowly around us, and it doesn't appear all of a sudden. Whereas if you're outside looking in, you can easily see, oh, this one is a problematic behavior pattern. And because these self-created problems are harder to recognize, they may also be harder to solve. And so I think that this involves a lot of introspection about the teams that you've created. Have I created a team that is now tolerating bad behavior? And I think this is something you must continuously ask yourself as you lead a team. Now, what kind of behaviors are we talking about? And there's a whole laundry list of them, but incivility, discrimination, non-team behavior in workplaces, bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, and on and on and on. Unfortunately, there's too many of them, and there's too many, and it's far too common. And this has real costs, as I shared also at RSNA, that there are, this was a survey of 800 managers and employees in 17 different industries. It's a few years old now, but nevertheless, it's very powerful. 48% of people intentionally decrease their work effort. 47% intentionally decrease the time spent at work. 38% decreased the quality of their work. They just did not feel engaged anymore, is basically the bottom line. 80% lost work time worrying about incidents that they had encountered. 63% lost work time avoiding the offender that we're talking about. 66% that said that work performance has declined. People said that their commitment to the organization, a huge majority, commitment to the organization declines. And this makes sense, right? If you don't feel like the workplace is protecting you in some form, that your engagement will go down. 12% left their job because of the uncivil treatment. That's a massive cost, and 25% admitted to taking their frustration out on customers. In our case, our customers would be our patients. And imagine a quarter of of our employees doing something that actually hurts our patients. I think that, and this number probably wouldn't be as large in healthcare because we have a large patient care ethos, but nevertheless, this is disturbing, and if it even happens to one patient. Now, managers and executives said in the same Harvard Business Review article that 13% of their time was spent dealing with incivility in the workplace. That's a lot. And think about in the highest level of our management spending that much time doing that. So the question, I think, to all of us is, what can we do? And I think there's going to be a lot of time for discussion on this, and please feel free to interrupt with questions. But what can we do about this? And for me, the first finger has to point at oneself. One has to make sure that you root this out in yourself. Now, in Heal Thyself, I don't mean that we're sitting around, all of us, going around being horrible people all the time. I don't want to imply that. However, I think all of us as humans make mistakes. And when we make that mistake, and that you may be having a bad day, you may have had, a million things go wrong all at once. You may be worried about a patient and something is going on, which is just a ticky-tack thing that is annoying you. But these indiscretions happen. And the point is that when they happen, we have to say sorry. And I think that that is the number one thing, and say it and mean it. And when we say sorry, the apology, the recipient of the apology has the right to say, yes, I accept it or not. And I think that if we follow this pattern, it actually roots out a lot of uncivil behavior, because it models for our team what we want. And I think this is the second piece of that heal thyself, that we have to model the behavior we want to see in our team. And I don't mean to be pedantic about this, and I don't paternalistic either, that, it's not like our teams are our children, and I don't want to compare that. But I think that we do at home try to think about what are we modeling at home and what's the behavior we want at home. And I think that a similar kind of consideration, what is the behavior we want at work? And if we're not modeling it as the people who are leading a team, then we can't expect it of team members. And I think this is really a critical piece. The second piece is hiring for decency first. The farther I have gone in my career, the more I feel like this is the critical part of hiring. So those of you who know me well enough, I'm an MR geek up and down the chain. I can teach a monkey how to do MR. I can teach case-based up and down all day long, because at the end of the day, it's not that complicated, and it's not a skill that anyone was born with. But when we get to grown adults, things that they should have learned in kindergarten is very, very difficult to teach in a workplace. And so I don't think you're fundamentally going to change people who may have pathologies in their behavior. And I think that hiring for decency first is probably the most critical thing that I have learned in my experience. So when I'm interviewing people, yeah, their CV, I'm looking at it, and it may be deficient in one area or another, or maybe they didn't train so well. If they didn't train so well, I can train them, but I can't teach them how to behave. And so this is like a really critical first piece. And prevention in this case is much easier than the cure. And so I can't emphasize this point enough. And to get this right, the more responsible the position that you're hiring for, the more important vetting is in that process. And picking up the phone and calling up a colleague and asking them, hey, this person, what is this about? Are they good with this kind of scenario? And I'm constantly surprised at when people have not worked out, and there have been people above me and there have been people below me, constantly surprised at how often this simple vetting process was not completely carried out. That was awesome, Jess. And so this vetting process is a critically difficult piece, because it involves difficult conversations with people that you need to pick up the phone and do, and it involves time, but it will save a lot of heartache in the future. And we have learned that when we do this vetting, it has saved us potential like real red flag kind of problems by making those calls.
Can I ask a quick question on this, on the vetting and how so hiring for decency, aside from vetting, are there any other tips or techniques that you use to really get at what sorts of character traits or behavior traits a person has that you want to recruit to your team?
Yeah, I think the vetting piece I emphasize because in a half hour, an hour interview, people are not necessarily going to reveal their full selves to you. And so the vetting piece gets you to prior experience. But when I'm talking to them, I tend to ask open-ended questions about, tell me about how you run your teams. tell me about how you handle, conflict. Tell me what's value. What do you value in your job? And I'll open it into a more comfortable conversation about what we are discussing, rather than getting into like particular details about their CV, which I could care less about most of the time. There are some times where you need to really get into those details about the CV, but that also lends itself pretty okay to an email. Whereas I think an interview, that's a valuable half-hour, hour that you have, that you really want to try to get a feel for what the person was saying. The other thing is that I really want to know from the other people interviewing, what was their experience like? And particularly, so for example, in a research group, I will put people in touch with grad students. How are they behaving with the grad student? They may be being nice to me, but if they're being bad to the grad student, that's a red flag. A faculty candidate who's not treating the admin who's taking them around particularly well is a red flag. And so, I pay attention to those soft signs. Now, could I overread those soft signs? Probably yes, but I'd rather make that mistake than the mistake of someone with a red flag showing up in my department and then poisoning people. And so, poisoning figuratively, not literally, but like it's a, these are the kind of things that I try to do. The other side of the coin about vetting is a need for honesty with those people calling. And I think this part, I think medicine does a horrible job of this. And I understand why we do it, that we don't want to poison someone's career, and we don't want to hurt someone. What if I'm wrong? Or there may be even a Machiavellian that people want to get rid of the problem that they have, and they don't want to take this person away from a job. But all those things are propagating bad behavior. And I don't mean that we need to be, really black marking somebody's, their reputation, and we don't need to be doing ad hominem attacks on people. But if there's documented problems, we must say what they are if someone calls you. And and I think that we can't have a situation where we're hurting the reputation of our field because we're allowing this behavior to propagate through our profession. So I think this is a responsibility that we have to each other. And so, if a chair picks up the phone and calls me, or sends me an email, but this is not an email conversation, I will, I'll tell them. I'll pick up the phone and call them. And I think this is important. Stating your expectations, I think, is a really important piece of it. And actually, let me go back one more about the honesty piece. And when talking about this, you do have to be very, very careful that you're not just expressing an emotion without facts behind it. It has to be factual. You cannot be hurting people's careers willy-nilly. And I've very rarely had to do this, but when it arises, you have to. Stating one's expectations to the group is a critical piece, and try to make more and more this a centerpiece of both our research team and clinical teams that we try to lead, that our expectation is a healthy, warm workplace. And if you start with that expectation, and this is what we're building around, this is the core, the cornerstone, then I think that this becomes, it's something that people imbibe. They make it part of their work DNA. And I think that this is a really key part of it. And stating their expectation has another effect, which is that good behavior really needs to be rewarded. And people, what happens oftentimes in a problematic situation is that the problematic person gets all the attention, and they take away attention from 99% of your team, which is behaving superbly well. And I think this has a very demoralizing effect on the team. And so, and we all know the various studies that have said that in any relationship, 5-to-1 praise to negative is an important piece. It also goes for our teams. And so rewarding good behavior and consistently calling out the positives, I think, is a really important piece of this. Now, this piece is also driven by evidence. So at University of Michigan School of Business, we have a Center for Positive Organizations. And this, the CPO, as it is called, examines the top 1% of organizations around the country. And they measure things like productivity, employee well-being, and they've picked up a rich body of empirical data that they're building up, and they've published books and papers and many ongoing seminars. And they identify the processes and conditions that promote optimal human function. And so this CPO is something that we've tapped into the Department of Radiology. And so this, sort of the book that started all of this was by Kurt Cameron, and this is Kim Cameron, deriving excellence by recognizing and fostering individual and collective strengths, resources, and potential. That's his mantra for getting things done in this manner. So the positive organizations, it turns out, foster high quality connections. And these are they can be very short-term interactions that involve respect, reciprocity, and trust. They can be very brief exchanges. And it's just recognizing that this person did something good or that person did something good. In your emails, a small email that recognizes a positive piece. And this improves workplace performance by increasing cognitive skills, increasing creativity, positive emotions, positive connections. And the claim is even that it improves physical health. I think this is a lot more data are needed, but this is pretty interesting if this holds up. And so the question is also, on the flip side, what if someone is behaving badly? What do we do about that? So we're fostering positives, we're saying positives, we're hiring for positive, but what if someone is behaving badly? And this is one of my favorite pictures, and I found this, and I love this. This is what we cannot do. This is a bunch of Australians. They were protesting their government's climate policy, but I think that it holds for us. We can't pretend that this is not out there. And some of the things that I read, that I hear about people who are behaving badly, but they're horrible in setting acts, but they're an excellent clinician. They really care about their patients. They do it because they expect perfection. They're an excellent researcher. They bring in so and so many dollars in billables or research. They work incredibly hard. They're super fun in other settings. They only do it when they're stressed. They were mostly joking around, except to the person who got it, right? And on and on and on. The problem is all of these things can be true, and they probably are, because human beings are not binary creatures. They're not horrible or great. They actually exist on a spectrum, and if they're horrible in a particular setting, we need to fix that or call it out or do something about it. And we can't excuse it. I mean, to me, all of this boils down to, this is a red herring, right? They're horrible in setting acts. We determined that. but we are now saying they're in excellent condition. Well, they can be, of course, but are they behaving badly to your team? And so I think asking ourselves these questions and saying that all these reasons that they may be a good person in other areas, that can't be used as an excuse to blow it off. We have to fix the problem that we're dealing with. And this also then means that we stand for something or we stand for nothing. And this has been stressed to me by a friend that I value very much, and her opinion is critically important to me in the department. But there are lines that we must draw, that we cannot tolerate behavior beyond that line. A second part of this is that we need to foster non-traditional models of leadership, that a leader isn't just, I think in the past, a lot of locker room behavior was tolerated from leaders. There's a lot more complexity to leaders. And I think that the more diverse our leaders, whether it be how they think, whether it be their gender, whether it be their race, I think diversity in all forms creates multiple forms of thinking within a leadership team. And it helps to root out out-of-line behavior, because one group may see it, another group may not. And then I think it's really important to titrate responses. That is, that you can't tolerate, and then suddenly lower the boom. That's not going to be functional. And so titrated response is going from a minor transgression may not need anything the first time around, if it's minor, or it may need a minor conversation. Whereas as you titrate up, really bad behavior may need something more. We've adopted at University of Michigan, I know this is being adopted at UCSF as well, and multiple other places, this PARS and CORS, Patient Advocacy Response System, and Coworker Observation Reporting System, CORS. And this is to identify physicians who fall well outside the norm in their behavior. And this has been a successful program at multiple institutions. It kind of rates, it takes people with multiple transgressions and kind of says, okay, well, this person is starting to be an outlier. The danger, particularly with the CORS, is that it can be a little bit, like if you're not careful, it can be a little bit punitive. And so you have to teach people how to use these in a proper manner. But if you go through the training, it can be a very powerful tool, and I think it's one to consider. An important piece, in my opinion, is early intervention. So, if someone has shown early signs of some behavior that you don't value, pointing it out early in their career, the earlier it is, the easier it is to root out. The more set in your ways you become, the harder it is to root out. And I think this is, a really important piece, and therefore you're not doing anyone any favors by kind of, burying your head in the sand, so to speak. And also part of the PARS core system is this cup of coffee conversation kind of thing, which is that a first interaction or first problem, especially one that's minor, may simply require a cup of coffee conversation, taking a person aside and saying, hey, do you realize how this might have felt to this person? And oftentimes that can create that awareness that allows people to change. And another part of that is that it gets individuals to partner in their improvement. I think that if we, in a management situation, if you're constantly kind of raining down on somebody and saying, do this, I don't think that's going to be particularly successful. I think you need a partnership for that person to feel like, oh yeah, this is what I want to accomplish. And, asking them how this is making them feel is also important. And, engaging their human side and getting them to say, yeah, I want to change this particular side of the behavior. Because oftentimes I think people are aware when they've done something that they're not proud of. And I think getting their partnership in that is really important. A really key thing, and this is really hard, is annual reviews, because there are opportunities for improvement. There are also opportunities for documentation of problems. If someone is behaving poorly, letting them know in an annual review that this is a problem means that you ask them formally to change something. And if you're just saying, oh well, this is great, this is great, this is great in the annual review and ignoring the problems, it's not a proper review. And how will they then improve their performance? And you're saying in written form that the performance is fine if you're not documenting. So I think asking people formally in a review setting, and that doesn't mean, again, that wagging your finger. I think that recognizing the complexity of humans, most of their review may be positive, but if there's a problem, then we need to call that out. And then it goes also to note-taking and documentation, that if someone is having repeated problems, it really requires documentation so that you're showing that this is a problem and it's not just a one-off incident that you're dealing with. A really important piece, and I wished multiple times in my career that I had better bystander training. When these things happen, you're standing there next to somebody who may have been wronged, and you're like, I can't believe I just saw that. And then a day later, 2 days later, you go, oh, I wish I'd thought to say this, right? And this has happened to me at least 2 or 3 times in my career, where I really wish I had better, better bystander training. And in at least one instance, having thought about bystander training allowed me to intervene in a way that prevented a problem. And so I think this is something that we should be promoting in our institutions, and because it can prepare people, good people, to prevent a situation from getting worse. And so I think this is really important, and it also makes the person who's experiencing the bad problem, feel supported. Because one of the worst things about experiencing those problems is that you feel like you're alone. And taking that out and making sure that there's someone there actually watching out for you, I think that's a really key piece. All right. Our chief of staff in our health system is Marie Lozon, and she is amazing. And she said to me when I first got to University of Michigan that this is a tool, non-renewals are a tool that chairs do not use often enough. And this holds true of all leaders, that if an employee is not behaving in the way that is the cultural expectation that you want in your department, in your research group, in your division, whatever the group you may lead, I think sometimes a very difficult decision has to be made, and you have to make it. It shouldn't be used willy-nilly. It should be used very rarely. But when it's needed, we have to have the strength to use it. With this, I'll stop the formal part of this and just thank 2 people who have contributed greatly to this thinking. Amy Young, Dr. Amy Young is at the Department of Radiology and also the Center for Positive Organizations at the Ross School of Business. I alluded to that work in the CPO, and she's embedded in our department as part of our faculty. Dr. Kim Garver, Associate Chair for Department Life and Culture, has really helped me define that whole role. Associate Chair for Department Life and Culture is a dear friend and has really helped me think about these problems. With this, I'll stop. Thank you, and open it up for discussion.
Wow, thank you so much for that presentation. There's so many gems in there. I'll invite the participants to enter questions that they might have into the chat. I know I have a couple of questions. Maybe I'll start things off. And I think you alluded to a little bit when you talked about intervening early. But I'm curious, like, what's the threshold, right? Like, someone complains about a thing one time, like, are you intervening every time? Like, how do you know that this is a pattern, this is really something that needs to be addressed, or that this is a interpersonal conflict, and perhaps it's the interpersonal relationship that needs to be addressed as opposed to one side of that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, so there isn't a set answer to that question. I mean, I think that it depends on the transgression, right? Like if it's a minor thing, or if you can, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. And so if, two people are, having a conflict, I haven't heard the other side of it. And so you have to be a little bit careful that you don't overreact to every blip. And so I think about it as like, what's the size of the wave I'm dealing with? And, a little wave will not rock the ship very much. And, we'll wait and see. But if it's a serious transgression, then you have to act the first time. And, we've had in research groups, we've had people with, I've had to deal with sexual harassment problems. And the first time that arises, that has to be dealt with right there, right? It can't be allowed to kind of go along, percolate, and infect other people, or get worse, right? And so I think that it depends on the size of the transgression. The other is, like, if you start to see a pattern, the problematic people kind of declare themselves pretty quickly. And when they do, you start to see a pattern, then I think you have to start to act formally, and so I don't have a clean answer to that question, but I think that I titrate it. There's a question also from Dr. Dunnick in the chat about people behaving badly and about how do you reward publicly those exhibiting good behavior. And I think, Dr. Dunnick, as always, you raise a really important and I think key take-home point. I think that we have to focus our energy on the behavior of people doing well. I will do things like in any group I lead, try to acknowledge all the time their accomplishments, little awards, big awards, milestones. You try to acknowledge those in a public manner. If someone has done something kind for someone, acknowledging it. In my chair role, I get emails about people's outstanding clinical work. Well, you can send them an email that says thanking them, but also acknowledging it in a faculty meeting. So, I think that these little pieces of trying to make sure that you're calling out the good stuff, I actually try to take away the oxygen from the bad stuff. So I'll never talk about it publicly, or try to take it away as much as possible, starve it of attention. And so I think it's a two-faceted approach. One is to call out all the positives, and one is to take away the negatives. The other piece that I'm trying to establish is increasingly establish tokens of appreciation, awards that call out big things, good things, in ways that we can, people can take pride in. Another part of it is that we establish citizenship as the key metric for our compensation plan. That if you're not a good citizen, you are not eligible for anything else. This is maybe a little bit negative, but what it means is that everyone getting a bonus is acting positive. And so again, like consistently just keeping on calling out good things that the department is doing, or good things that a research team is doing, or a good thing in a division. I think it's key. And I actually find that it has an effect on me, that if I'm saying positive things about people, it actually makes you feel better. And you know, if you become cognizant of it, like it really makes you feel better that you're saying stuff that's really good. I don't know if that answers your question, Dr. Dana.
One of the things that I actually did in our department, which is a little bit of a smaller footprint, is we created a board called the Whale Done board based on the book by Ken Blanchard. And it's the idea that you make visible the catching people in moments of doing things right, not catching people in moments of doing things wrong. So we make it very visible so that we break it down into kudos for doing a good job, or getting a good comment from a patient, or from a performance in conference, promotions, anybody who gets an abstract accepted, anything like that, just so that it's very visible and people will stop and ask, what is this board all about? And we actually have a picture of the book down below so that people can look at it for more reference and context.
That's a great point. You know, I'm reminded of an anecdote that I haven't shared in a long time, and that was I was running an MD PhD conference a long time when I was actually a student, a grad student, and someone whose work I admired greatly, who was an MD PhD, but who chose never to do clinical medicine. He did a residency and stopped. And I asked him why he did not go on and practice. And he said, you know, at the end of the day in research, I will be known for my best day. The day I produce the best paper I've ever done, you know, or the best science I've ever done. In medicine, I feel like I will be remembered for my worst day, the day I have my worst miss. And we tend to have this culture sometimes in medicine, right? We're rather hypercritical. And I think that we must guard against that cynicism, that, oh, that person had that horrible miss. Well, who amongst us has not had a miss? And so I think that we do need to focus our attention on, hey, that person had a horrible miss is not the story. That person had, what about that great catch? You know, and I think rewarding that great catch, or rewarding that ability to make a difference, and we make a difference all day long, all the time. And how often do those great catches get acknowledged in our reading room and so on? I think that this is a culture that we must inculcate into medicine.
Well, I have a question for you. So you talked before about being honest when people call you about a current employee or maybe a former employee. And as a leader, how do you make that distinction, you know, particularly if it's a problematic individual that maybe you've had to not renew or to let go? How do you carve that out so that it is your opinion versus your role as the leader's opinion? And especially if you're constrained by what your HR department is telling you, how do you make it clear that you're acting in one of these two roles, and which role do you actually have to take?
So, I mean, you know, over the course of years, I mean, this happens rarely, first of all. It's not a common thing. It does happen. And, you know, the HR rules must be followed, and they must be carefully studied, and you must know them. Now, and you must guard against the fact that you might be wrong. And so, you know, you don't walk into that scenario with sort of all guns blazing. I think that you have to stop and think, have I given this person a fair shake? Could they be right? Could the conflicts that they're experiencing be viewed from their point of view? And I think that by the time you come to a non-renewal kind of scenario, or in a lab, someone you're saying, okay, can't go on, or any kind of situation like that. Hopefully by then you've really reached that conclusion in a documented way where you're like on solid ground, right? And then HR rules are different in different scenarios. Some scenarios require letting someone go with cause. Some scenarios don't require that. And I think that is highly variable in each organization. You have to kind of get to know it. And each job class that you're dealing with. So I don't, there isn't a uniform way of dealing with that, except that you must follow the rules. As to the personal versus, documented, I think that I try to get a multitude of opinions on this stuff. That I'm not just walking into it. Everyone has biases. I have mine, right? So we can't. If I'm going to say I'm not biased, I'm being stupid. Of course I'm biased. But if I'm asking a whole bunch of diverse people their opinion, and I'm coming to a conclusion based on all of that input, then I think I'm guarding against my biases as much as I can. Right? And that goes also to the documentation piece. There's a question in the chat by Dr. Pfeiffer. Great talk. I've seen some of these situations play out, and while I agree it's often necessary to document, bring another person into the room to confront the accused, it seems that this also necessarily changes the dynamic for the accused, as when the person sees the witness brought in, they know they're on the path to walking the plank. How do you balance this? So this is a great point. Some documentation actually may not involve a third person, a third party. So supposing that you've had a conversation with person X, and it's a difficult conversation, sending them an email that says, we talked about this today, and this is what we agreed to do, can be a very gentle email that actually doesn't have to be very accusatory, but it documents that you had a conversation and you agreed upon a pathway forward. That also serves as a reminder to oneself that this is what we agreed upon. So 2 months later, you're not overblowing what you think you told the person, because our memories are also faulty. And the other person also remembers that, okay, yeah, we agreed to this. So I think some part of that documentation does not necessarily involve a third party. Now, some scenarios may involve that, yes, you cannot have a certain kind of conversation without a third party present. But by then, hopefully that you're only needing that in some situation that's so far out of control that everyone in the room recognizes that these, a difficult conversation must be had. And I do agree that there's a kind of an uncertainty principle kind of thing happening there, where the presence of a third party alters the second and first parties. But again, I kind of reserve that for the super serious, unusual situations.
I'm wondering if you might be willing to talk a little bit about how some of these concepts apply in the setting of like poor performance, right? I guess this isn't necessarily like nasty behavior, but more poor performance. And I'll share briefly sort of a personal experience, and that was that someone that I had hired had really poor performance, and there was lots of feedback and just not seeing a whole lot of improvement. And at what point do you how do you intervene in that situation, and when do you start to say, okay, this monkey is not going to learn K-space, and maybe this monkey needs to learn a different path. And here we are with an employee, and like this, it's a sticky situation when you don't have that nasty behavior.
Yeah, that often, in my opinion, that tends to fall into two big buckets. And that has to do with insight. And I think that oftentimes, I would say a majority of the time, if someone's failing at a job, most of the time they do have insight that they're having trouble. And if they have insight, that's a great tool that you can use to help them either move to a job that's better suited or to improve their performance. And, and so talking to them and really bringing out how is this making you feel? Oftentimes will bring out that insight because they're not feeling good about it. Like if you're doing poorly at a job, it's very difficult to feel good about that. And then you can use that because that actually creates leverage for, to have a further discussion and to kind of get them to see, is this the right job for them or not? And if it is the right job, and they really do want to improve, then there's your opportunity to try to give them that, the tools needed to improve. On the other hand, if the person doesn't have insight, I think that's a very, very difficult situation where you're kind of trying to tell them, dude, this is not working. And they are, they think that everything is fine. And in that scenario, again, I start with myself. Am I mistaken? Am I about to make a big, giant mistake? And, the insight from others is really important. And it's really important to not just be unilateral and just rely on my opinion. There's a great talk on the internet somewhere. It's a TED talk, and it's on errors. And the person giving the talk talked about Wile E. Coyote in the old Roadrunner cartoons. And she said, when Wile E. Coyote is running around and he goes off the cliff, there's always a moment where he realizes he's off the cliff and he falls. But the error didn't happen when he realized that he was wrong. The error happened when he ran off the cliff. And at that time, if you asked him how he felt normal. And I think that, so like, am I about to make a mistake is a really important thing because it's going to feel normal. And so I think that asking yourself that question first, that am I right? And then if they still, and you decide with a whole bunch of consensus that they're wrong, then I think that person is going to need a very difficult conversation that that this is not working for XYZ reasons. Here's what you need to do to improve performance, and giving them a chance to do that. So I think this is also like in the intervening early thing, like if it's going to a point where their performance is affecting whether you can keep them in a job or not, that's a pretty extreme step. So sometime before that, perhaps some discussion about here's what we would like for you to do, and this annual reviews are a good tool for that.
So for those of you who may sort of be in a similar situation, I will just be completely honest and share that that whole I did a lot of blaming myself, thinking that I wasn't doing enough and wasted my entire probationary year and ended up in a much longer drawn out situation. So keep mind of your probationary periods and think about maybe asking someone else to take an observation and help you sort through, are you not doing enough or is it truly not a good fit?
I mean, I've made definitely my share of mistakes in this, and you learn from them. And the first time you encounter a difficult problem, I mean, unless you've thought about it a priori, you can be caught rather flat-footed. And so I think thinking through these scenarios and then when recognizing, oh, this is a pattern that I recognize from from discussions on these kinds of topics, I think is really important. Then using your colleagues, people in your people who are at similar stages of whatever you're doing, they'll have insight because they've dealt with that problem before. I can certainly call out Dr. Dunnick, about my problems when I need to, and he's been a wealth of wisdom to me. So I think that these kinds of things can really, you know, relying on your network can really help you.
I think it's also important, and you know, I think I've learned this certainly from being a residency program director, that the group think is really important, particularly for these very subtle infractions that the patterns are very hard to find. And it's only when you get that many individuals who have seen these, you know, problem children in different settings where it's one thing that comes up, or it's something different, particularly if it's not the same pattern, but it all goes to the same lack of professional behavior. And it's just very difficult to pinpoint. Professionalism itself is very hard to assess. It's very hard to moderate, and it's very hard to correct. And so I think that those group thinks are very helpful. And we've certainly seen it in the OPPE process at our institution, where we've had some individuals who have struggled, but it allows us to put the pattern together and to have a more meaningful conversation with them.
Great point. Completely agree.
I think I love the groupthink. I think it's super helpful in many instances. I have sometimes seen the groupthink kind of like mob around an idea. And I think sometimes we just have to remember that there can be a little bit of, there's probably a name for it, some sort of like group bias where like, oh yeah. And then the lemmings kind of go off in a direction. And I'm not sure how to fix that, but I think we just have to be cognizant that that can happen sometimes.
So one technique, one thing that I've stressed to my leadership group that helps me a lot is to slow it down. So you know, if we watch ER, we all laugh at ER, right, as doctors, because no one does cardiothoracic surgery in the ER. It's a myth. It's ridiculous. And you know, similarly, all our decisions in a clinical setting, like you may even have a life-threatening emergency, but you don't like march into the OR without scrubbing and do, like, there's a whole lot of thought that goes into any scenario that you're managing, even an emergent one. And oftentimes as leadership groups, we place an urgency to a matter that is self-imposed. And I think that urgency is almost always, you know, not needed. And so slowing it down, and what, you know, it allows us to take away some of that like group think where people are kind of converging on one idea. Allows people to go home, think about it, and come back. And we don't have to make this decision right now. I think that's a, you know, I think that's a really important tool, not only for this, but for many other pieces of leading, I think. And it also goes to that thinking slow and fast, that book, you know, slowing it down, I think, is really key.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for the talk. We are drawing to the top of the hour. I'm going to ask you both for some final thoughts as we close out this session. And thank you again for your time and the wisdom you've imparted to us.
Well, I don't have a, you know, pearl of wisdom on this. I feel like I think that this is a very hard topic, and there is no easy answers. There are no easy answers. I really do think that relying on each other, on colleagues, and, you know, people who have dealt with it before will help simplify problems and encourage people to reach out to others and talk to them. And trust your gut. Your gut is really important.
And I will say that I think Dr. Gulani is being a little too bashful in saying that he doesn't have a pearl, because I would argue that we got an entire strand of pearls in this hour. So lots of advice on how to sort of maintain integrity in a lot of these situations, slowing it down, kind of giving opportunities for improvement, reflection on all sides is really excellent. And when I reflect on incidences that I've experienced, I think a lot of this many of them would have gone better had I slowed it down, reflected myself, and given an opportunity for self-reflection on the other side of things. So thanks so much, everyone. There's a link for the survey in the chat box, and we hope you join us for our next webinar coming up.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.